Greetings, everybody. This is Dexter Kendrick. I'd like to welcome you all back to Dexter Kendrick Soul right here on YouTube, your place for relevant astrological conversations. I know it's been a minute, but life has been moving for all of us, I'm sure. We've just moved into springtime, which is the blossoming time. Plants are coming out of dormancy. Bumblebees are waking up. They have work to do. Everybody is waking up with lots of gumption and movement. And that's exactly what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about Venus entering into Aries today, where she will be until April 29th. And April 29th, she'll go home to Taurus. Talk about that a little later. But right now, Venus is moving into Aries. So what does that mean? Once again, whenever we're discussing planets and signs, I always like to discuss what the planets represent, because they represent certain psychological processes within us, and also how they're reflected out in the outside world. And then I'd like to talk about the sign, which always gives us an indication of how that planet is going to be expressing itself, how that planet is going to be working in our lives, how it's going to be best used so that we can maximize the potential. Now, Venus, of course, we know is the goddess of seduction and desire and values, those things that we value and find important to us, those things that we're interested in drawing into our lives, those things that we want. Because they have some kind of relevance to the work that we're doing. And Aries, as the first sign in the zodiac, as you see, this is essentially for most of the individuals who practice nature, religions, etc. Recognize this as the beginning of the year. The new year began for them on March 20th, which was the equinox, when there's equal balance in nature, and nature, of course, begins to wake up and begins to start to move and thrive. So Aries, as the first sign, represents infancy. Nature is right now in its infancy. Certainly it's coming awake, but it is just beginning to have a movement. And so whenever we're talking about Aries, we have to remember that in the beginning of life, let's take a seed. A seed has to have a significant amount of courage and ambition in order to break out of its shell, and then that vine or that baby plant has to have enough courage and ambition, and sometimes even anger and forcefulness, in order to push its way through soil, through gravel and rubble. And if it hits a blockage like concrete or something like that, in order to find sunlight and water that it will need to survive, it has to begin to practice a significant amount of flexibility to move in a different direction so it can ultimately get to its desired goal. And that's the essence of Aries. The essence of Venus in Aries during this 4-week period is going to be yourself. So, like I said, in order for a plant to thrive, it has to have a significant amount of self-esteem to say, you know what, I'm here. I have work to do, and I'm going to go about doing that work. Now, Venus, of course, planet of desire, represents those aspects of us that say what is valuable work to us. What is it that allows us to be ourselves, allows us to express ourselves, and allows us to go about in life getting it, achieving it. Of course, Venus always would prefer to use magnetism to draw people and things to her, but Venus is more comfortable in Libra, the opposite sign of Aries, than she is in Aries. In fact, most astrologers would say that Venus is currently in her fall because she is not comfortable with the in-your-face, here I am, take me or leave me, I'm going after what I want and I'm going to claim it, kind of an energy that Aries is. Aries is often associated with the ram. And if anybody who's ever watched nature, I highly recommend it. As the weather gets warmer, we all take a trip to the zoo and take a look at some of these animals that we are associating ourselves with, that are showing up in our conversations, because their temperament is what actually helps us to get a deeper understanding about how the planets are moving when they go into these constellations, etc. But furthermore, the 4-week period right now is how can we draw to us those things that we desire and value, and how can we do it in a way that allows us to be ourselves? How can we do it in a way that unapologetically says, I'm here, I know what I want, and I'm going to try and get it very transparently. There's no apology about it. And how can I do it in a way that honors both Venus and Mars? Of course, we know Mars is the god of war. I want something, I'm going after it, I'm going to take it. But Venus is I want something, and it's also important to me that you understand where I'm coming from while I'm being myself, and it's important to me that you also get something out of the deal. So Venus is kind of uncomfortable with how Mars is just kind of like, give it to me. And so there is a bit of reconciliation that's going to have to take place during this 4-week period. But Venus is the planet of desire. So if we're finding that we are attracted to somebody in matters of love, we will have to show up, and we will have to establish that that is how we're feeling. And speaking in I terms, Aries is always concerned with the self and conversations that are derived from the self, not necessarily conversations that involve other people. But Venus is always about creating balance and harmony, and we can only really do that by interacting with other people. Certainly we will find pleasure in activities that we can do alone. So if we can help other people in group activities, etc., it will probably be best at this time if we can work by ourselves. Just because at this time Venus, the aspect of Venus and the pleasure principle is such that we'll get more done, and we'll be more successful, and we'll have a lot less conflicts. If you remember, the ram has horns for a reason. We'll have a lot less conflicts if we have to work and negotiate with other people. It's better if we can just take our work and go off and play somewhere by ourselves. In matters of love, the conversation will be, if we come into conflicts with other people, to make sure we're using I statements. I feel like this. I perceive that when you do such and such and such, I feel this way. I didn't feel respected, or I felt like my value was diminished because something wasn't acknowledged that I was trying to say to you. I feel like I'm not being listened to, etc. When we use I statements, we begin to deflect, we begin to own ourselves and deflect any conversation of opposition, because the other person can't argue with how you're feeling. So when you're speaking from your I space, that is where your power lies. In terms of relationship, if we run into any kind of blocks for people that we might be interested in, we're going to have to use flexibility. A vine, if it decides it wants to go forward and there's a piece of concrete, it will wither and die. If we don't practice flexibility during this blossoming time, we will not make it to the nutrients and, of course, the pot of gold, which is perhaps, a new partner for summertime, just in time for when things are heating up. We'll talk about that a little later, closer to May. But in that conversation, right now is an opportunity to say, I'm here. I'm going to be myself. I know what I desire. I can claim it. And I can find a way to politely help you help me get it. And there's some wiggle room with that because of Venus's basic nature. But out of strife sometimes, and there might be also a clearing of the air. Aries does represent what happens when we go after what we want and we meet with opposition. What happens when other people oppose us? So the flexibility piece is there, but also sometimes it's important to clear the air. Being oneself means also owning your own value system, especially with Venus and Aries right now. Now, Aries will fall in a different area of our lives for each person. I highly recommend that you either contact me at Dexter Kendrick Soul on Facebook or Instagram, or go to alabe.com, ALABE.com, and see where Aries lies in your chart for you. That'll tell you the area of life right now that you can get the most pleasure out of working by yourself, even if it be for the greater good, but where you can get the most pleasure working by yourself and owning your own conversation. Be blessed. I will talk to you very shortly. Lots of things are going on this month. I know that Saturn recently went retrograde in Sagittarius, and Mars is going retrograde in Sagittarius through June. That's a big conversation because it's going to be shifting a lot of our perspectives and the meaning that we're getting out of the work that we've been doing since 2014. So stay tuned. Once again, follow me. Like, share, subscribe. Dexter Kendrick Soul here on YouTube. Follow me on Instagram and Facebook under the same name. And I will talk to you soon. Be blessed.